Welcome to the Department of Know Live. I'm Kelly Shortridge. I'm a Senior Principal Product Technologist at Fastly.
I'm B. Hughes. I'm a staff security engineer at PagerDuty.
We have Omar here today to join us in a very juicy discussion on why building more modern applications means building more secure ones. So, Omar, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Omar. I'm a staff security engineer at Betterment.
Perfect. And for the audience, throw any spicy takes or other comments you have in the chat. That should be in the bottom right of your screen. And we will be answering your questions after we finish our lovely discourse. So please put any questions you have in the Q&A section, which should be below your video. So to kick off the discussion, let's start with a very big, juicy question, which is what's working well or perhaps more likely not working well when it comes to building modern applications securely?
Honestly, I think it just comes down to communication. I've seen a lot of teams who are really good at upfront communicators, a lot of teams who kind of go out of their way to not communicate. And I think the responsibility falls on the security teams to kind of facilitate that.
I think communication is hard for humans in general, for sure. So can you talk a bit more about how security communication isn't working very well today and what security teams should be doing instead?
Yeah, so very often we'll see security teams finding out at the last minute that a new product is going live or that this architecture review is already complete without any security input. And part of that, I think, is due to security teams not making it clear when they should be looped in. But then also, a lot of engineering teams recognize that security often can slow down the process. So, in order to meet their deadlines, they just choose to save time and not talk to security at all.
And I'm very curious because I think we hear that a lot. And in fact, the name of this event is partly a pun on the Department of Know, which is the moniker for the security org or program. What do you think are the most kind of pernicious ways that the security team can slow down releases?
So I think often they will say no, as you had just mentioned. So very often, instead of proposing an alternative or instead of uh, understanding the use cases of the project, they will, without context, say, no, this can't go out, or no, you can't use this library. And without that deep understanding of what it is that your colleagues are working on, security engineers often don't have that context, but are still very readily uh, making decisions off that lack of information.
Yeah, and I know that you've mentioned the problem with, for instance, like security teams wanting to implement some sort of application security tool and not actually checking with developers first, like, hey, is this going to totally screw up your workflows and you're not going to be able to build anything? What do you recommend as far as it almost sounds like performing a bit of user research ahead of kind of figuring out what you're going to do in your security program?
Yeah, I think this can kind of come down to like dog fooding, where you have internal processes for engineering. Security should be participating in those as well. So, for example, if you're deploying a web app firewall, you need to be able to work with the engineers who actually develop that web app so that they know that, this web application firewall might change the way HTTP errors are handled. If they don't know that that's happening, then suddenly their error monitoring is out of whack, or they're seeing errors that they don't know how to diagnose. So working with the engineers can help both the engineers and the security team figure out the appropriate tools and just make better decisions all around.
Have you ever experienced because I think traditional security people would be like, well, developers are unwilling to, do anything with security or implement any security tools. Like, how do you deal with any pushback like that?
Yeah, I think the appropriate way is to kind of meet everybody where they're at. So part of building a robust application is building a secure application. So making sure that the application developers, the engineers understand that, hey, we're all on the same side. We want an application that, doesn't fall over at the slightest breeze. And so we are all kind of on the same side here. And so making that clear makes it a little bit easier for engineers to want to get invested in security in the same way the security team is.
So as part of a SDLC or a secure SDLC, as people have made the
Yeah.
acronym more complicated.
DLC. Just like hiss a little at the beginning.
Lisps and me, S-word letters not good. Yeah, I've known companies who have built specific SDLC components to ask security questions, and from that it garners to a degree how much security should be involved, or if it sounds like fairly fine to not have a more dedicated security time. But that requires an organizational maturity and an engineering maturity that not all organizations, I feel, have.
For sure. It's definitely a progress, a work in progress. You need to kind of make sure that you do your best to evangelize this process, that this process is not isolated from what engineering does. So, for example, I've seen some places attempt a secure SDLC by having a separate security form, by having a page on the wiki that isn't really linked to anywhere else. So, of course, only the engineers who know about it and care about it are going to go through that process. But if you kind of respectfully shoehorn security into the processes that already exist, you can have a lot more impact that way. And it's also a little bit more difficult to ignore.
Yeah, I think the opt-in versus opt-out part is interesting. Brief tangent, there's the concept from behavioral economics called choice architecture, which is basically how can you influence people's decision making by like designing things in certain ways. Kind of sounds like so one of the powerful things is defaults. The classic experiment is with 401ks, make it an opt-out model. So your default is like 4% savings, then people save more for retirement, everybody rides off into the sunset, right? So I think with opt-out models, like a lot of times those can be more effective, which I think in security can sometimes mean security by design. And I think a lot of people think about that or interpret that in different ways. So I'm very curious when you hear like security by design or making like, the safe way, the easy way is what you hear a lot. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I see security engineering often as kind of designing IKEA furniture where, you have an IKEA manual, it doesn't have any words in it, doesn't need it. So someone who is following this diagram can safely build a chair with all of its legs facing the same direction without having to, call up IKEA and say, hey, my chair has 3 legs, what's going on? I think security can learn a lot from that, where you can provide the manuals, you can provide the guidance in a very easily digestible form. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes that means shoehorning security into what already exists, but also it just means making security not just the right thing, but the easy thing to do. So you have to really go out of your way to, I don't know, build that chair with 3 legs.
I think you'd be surprised if you watch me build IKEA furniture. Like, it's amazing how much I can screw up and then I have to like take everything apart again. But assuming engineers aren't as like bad at building IKEA furniture as I am, what are some of, I guess, kind of what's the equivalent of like the 3-legged like chair in security? Like, have you like built anything like in your programs that you feel like is a good case study for like this IKEA sort of model?
Yeah. So I've worked with, for example, static analyzers that will block a build when it detects what it thinks is a vulnerability. But very often, static analysis tools are obtuse, very opaque, and they say very deeply technical things that you might need a master's degree in computer security to understand. So I have also built static analysis tools for security purposes. And kind of the thing that I keep in mind is, I'm maintaining these tools. What can I do to minimize the time required or the number of situations in which someone sees this output has to reach out to me directly? So providing as much context up front, providing examples, linking out to documentation. These static analysis tools, a lot of the off-the-shelf ones don't do this. So security engineers are very quick to deploy them, but application developers want nothing to do with them and will often remove them from their CI/CD processes if they can.
It seems the concept of security UX is one that is often overlooked, and I don't just mean command line options to GPG. I mean, if you don't make your tooling usable, then why would people use it? So
Right.
you want it to be as low friction as possible, and you want the things it outputs to be as consumable by the target audience, not as consumable by a security team.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's this very big distinction that is not often talked about safe versus secure. You can have secure software that does the right thing, but the distinction is that it's only doing the right thing if you know how to make it do the right thing. Safe, on the other hand, you have to, it makes the decisions for you in a way that makes it very difficult to almost put yourself at risk. For example, I've worked with stack analysis tools again that if you Google an error message, you'll find a Stack Overflow answer that says, oh, here's how you can disable this. And that will be the top voted answer. So that I would say is secure in that, yes, it identified a vulnerability, but it is not safe in that the developer's first instinct is to just turn it off and not even attempt to understand that message.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think it's a really good point, kind of looking at the history kind of security. I think what's interesting looking now and kind of looking ahead and how things are shifting is like security really, at least the way I describe it, is often more of an advisor, but it sounds like what you're saying too, and like making the security the easy way. There's definitely room for them to like build tools and like automation. I don't know if you have any particular case studies you want to highlight of where you've seen automation like work best, because there are different theories, right? Like some people say just automate, like whatever is automatable should be automatable. It's like maybe not. My view is, or my bias is more towards automate away things where humans aren't great in it, things that are like repetitive or require like it to be the same every time. Like humans suck at that. So let humans focus on stuff that involves a bit more ambiguity. What's your view on like where is security best when it comes to automation? Like where should you start first?
Yeah, so I think, for example, those stack analysis tools I was talking about, I think that is also a really good example of kind of reducing ambiguity, where you have stack analysis tools that will output, I don't know, 500 lines for a single finding. Some of those vulnerabilities can either be automatically fixed or suggestions can be provided for you automatically. But then also, uh, dependency management, we've got tools that will say, oh, this thing is very out of date, and a developer just wants to deploy their code. They don't have time to say, oh, I have a one line PR, but I'm blocked because this dependency hell needs to be resolved. So a lot of automation there, where if you have a solid CI/CD pipeline, you can automate software package upgrades. You can automate a lot of things there that developers don't want to think about, security engineers don't want to think about, and I feel like a lot of product teams have some fear around automatic updates, which is reasonable. I do agree that having that fear is healthy. But if you have a robust test suite, for example, you can often opt into automatic updates and kind of reduce that almost cognitive overload of how many updates need to happen before you can get your change out the door.
Seems like there's a slight asterisk over like having like solid CI/CD pipelines, because my impression is like that's not true everywhere, right? So how would you suggest people that maybe are still struggling? Maybe they have CI, but they're still a little wobbly on the CD part. Should they pursue automation anyway? Do you think that's actually security should be championing sort of CI/CD initiatives? Like, what's your take there?
Yeah, so I think this is where collaboration between security and engineering comes in, where the robustness of an application inherently requires security as well. So by acknowledging that a good application is a secure one, you can have key steps, for example, tightening up your CI/CD process so that you can have automatic updates, automatic testing. And by using robustness as kind of the end goal, you can achieve both security goals and product goals. So engineering now has tools that can say, hey, this can't go out to production for some reason or another. And now security also has tools that says the same thing. So they might be for different reasons, but by coming to the same conclusion that, hey, our deploy process needs to be more robust than it actually is right now, then everybody is better off.
That makes sense. What are some kind of concrete examples of those security requirements? Like, it sounds like in this almost, it's a collaborative, but it is a negotiation. Like what it sounds like, if it's monitoring, like being able to like, have that precious visibility into things. Like, can you just explain like some of the requirements that you tend to prioritize when you're like performing this dance with product?
Yeah. So one really big thing that I see often is, the ability to say uh, users shouldn't be able to access, data in bulk. So this might be because you are offering, data that is useful to some people. Some people out there might want to scrape your data set for some reason or another. And as an application developer, very often that is kind of uninteresting. People will say like, okay, you can run curl a million times against my website. Why should I care? And so they might not prioritize rate limiting or access controls. But as a security engineer, if you have that web application firewall, you can so very often build that in front of the application. So if you're a developer, say, well, I need to get this out the door, but I don't have time to build scraping mitigations, then with your web application firewall, you can set rate limits, you can set uh, all sorts of blockers, and work with product to say, this is at the web application firewall level for now, but ideally we would like to see this at the application level. Can we get that after you're on production?
Security being there to support engineering and releasing product, not to get in the way of and stop product being released. Kind of that mindset shift
Agreed.
is how it,
Yeah, I think ultimately security is all about the people. And so as soon as you start reducing or even removing people from the equation entirely, you are just now creating this, I don't know, fun playground for just security engineers, and nobody else will enjoy that.
Yeah, I think this has been awesome context, and I think removing people from the equation entirely definitely sounds a little sinister. No, this has been an awesome discussion, and I want to give you the chance if you have any like kind of imparting pithy wisdom that you want to share with the audience before we move into live Q&A. Please, we would love to hear it now.
Just remember the people. Remember why you're here. It's all about the people, and don't forget why you're here.
It's always good. Like I feel that way a lot when I enter a room is like, why am I here? So I feel like that's just good life advice. No, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we can move into live Q&A. So if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A box that's below all of our lovely faces here.